Hello and welcome to the Trauma Informed SLP. I am Kim Neely, and this is a podcast where we learn to promote safety and empowerment in everyone we know, including ourselves. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So sorry it took me a little while longer to get this episode out than I wanted, of course. One of the big things that happened is, unfortunately, with that snow/ice storm that went through the country, oh gosh, I guess about 3 weeks ago now, I fell and I broke my left wrist and had to have some surgery done. And that has really slowed me down, especially with editing and things like that. So apologies, but I'm finally back, able to type, able to do things with it, and on the mend. Everything's starting to get better from there. But before we jump straight on into this episode, I just want to provide a little bit of a review of what we talked about in part 1. If it's been a while since you heard that episode, or if you just skipped it, which I do recommend going back and listening because Janyce provides so much great information, I think, that's so important for really understanding the nuance of facilitated communication and the new variants coming out and just the type of discussions that are ongoing right now. In that first episode, we listened to some of Janyce's story, how she got involved with facilitated communication, the kind of training she went through for it. I also brought in some of my own reflections as an SLP who's worked with non-speakers and with AAC. So in this episode, we do go a lot deeper into those ethical concerns. We also talk a lot about like subtle cueing and, sleight of hand type of dynamics that can really make some of these methods look really real and really appealing, even to really thoughtful, reflective professionals or parents or caregivers who care really deeply about the non-speaking children that they're trying to help. I think this episode is really important for anybody who identifies as anyone in any kind of helping profession or caregivers of any non-speaking child and or adult, because we are asking really hard questions about consent, autonomy, and what it really means to actually do no harm, as well as our own biases that we come into helping with that can really lead us down potentially very dangerous rabbit holes where we can really believe that we're helping, but in reality there's potential for some very significant harm to happen. And it's a tough discussion, but I think it's extremely important to listen to. However, with that said, if you do start to feel yourself feeling conflicted or uneasy or kind of dysregulated during this episode, please do just pause it, give yourself some time, sit a little with that discomfort, process through those emotions a little bit, and then come back to finish it when you're feeling a little better. I also want to let all speech language pathologists out there, if you're listening to this, if you're an SLP, I've been seeing on Reddit right now, on the SLP subreddit, people bringing up that these newer kind of facilitated communication approaches are now cropping up in occupational therapist clinics and places like that. And I did want to offer this because I've had ongoing email correspondence with Janyce since recording this interview. And she's let me know that the people who really promote these approaches, they are actually purposefully marketing to a wider range of professionals out there, essentially trying to bypass SLPs to some extent, because ASHA has maintained a very firm stance against these methods, and they have found SLPs to be a lot harder to sort of get on their side to some extent here. They are actually targeting like occupational therapists, and they're framing these techniques as really only working on fine motor and not really working on communication. You're really just working on the motor part, but because you're an OT, you can totally do it because it's working on the motor part, which personally I don't quite understand because, the facilitator's the one moving the board. So I'm not exactly, or holding the board. So I'm not exactly sure what fine motor, like exactly how that works. But I thought it was important to mention on this professional SLP podcast to let other SLPs know out there. Don't be too surprised if you see other professionals promoting this stuff, even if communication is not actually their scope of practice, because there's an intentional push toward getting other people to apply these techniques that is 100% creeping into our scope of practice. And in my opinion, potentially putting even more clients at harm. So I think that also adds an extra layer of why this interview is really important. And I think it's so important for us as SLPs. Although we might know better, we might know these are suspicious techniques, I think it's still important for us to at least keep up with what's going on with this and to educate ourselves on where this technique might be pushed the most, because they're doing another push essentially to spread them around. And it doesn't, as Janyce said, I believe somewhere in here, facilitate communication never actually went away. It just went underground for a while. And so it's kind of coming up from the underground, giving itself a push. And I'm sure history will repeat itself. It'll probably go back underground. But it's important because I know at least when I was in graduate school in the mid 20 teens, we were taught it's gone. Facilitated communication is dead and gone, and that's it. The other thing I'm going to do, though, there are still actually some deeper topics that we talked about, that Janyce and I talked about, that I'm actually going to put on my Patreon page for free. I'm only going to put it there because it does touch on more specific, like deeper topics, including like adult intimacy and consent and questions around that. The link is in the show notes, so feel free to click on over there and listen to another 30 minutes or so of Janyce and I kind of diving even deeper. All right, that's enough of jibber jabbering from me. Let's go ahead and get back into the interview. And this is going to pick up right where we start talking more about the false allegations of abuse that Janyce was involved in. So I hope you enjoy and gain some great insights. And yeah, let's get on with the episode. But it is interesting to me too when you were bringing up the court cases, like when we think of there are those abuse allegations, which for listeners, I did do a previous episode on this, which, I can maybe put the link or the title in the show notes, that went a little bit into, I didn't get super into it, but the history of, yes, there are allegations against abuse, and then the courts ordered actual like blind, double blind type experiments to see what was really going on here. It's interesting to me because it does sound a little, I'm not a lawyer, but I follow some online. So obviously I have some armchair knowledge.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Right.
Right.
No, but it does kind of sound like the legal system is so specific with when it asks for certain things and certain evidence. It does sound like a very interesting workaround from like, well, the law says the court cases showed that holding the hand meant this was happening. So if you don't hold the hand, suddenly it's a brand new thing.
Correct.
At least as far as the court cases are concerned, right? You can't call upon those former ones,
The touch-based, it came out of the pushback that the touch-based FC was getting in the mid 1990s. But even like if you read, I can't think of the book. I think it was Ito in Autism Land.
Okay.
And so the mom is talking about using touch-based FC, but the school system, the people at the school system were like, yeah, there's no evidence for that. Like you need to be really careful with that kind of support. And so even without any inkling of false allegations of abuse, she was like, well, I got to figure, because I know this works. I know there's a link between me and my son. I know he's in there. And so I need to come up with a way that makes it look like I'm not
actually doing what they think.
Touching his hand or anything. Yeah. And she actually came up with a pretty interesting, I don't know whether she was using actual like hand letter spelling with him, but she came up with a system of hand signals.
Oh, okay.
Which she used very clandestinely. If you watch the videos, they're kind of in his peripheral view, but just down below at the edge of the camera. So like very subtle. So they were able to get some responses using the hand signals, but then those are never faded away. Like the person just learns the hand signals.
He's not independent. That person still has to be there.
Well, they're saying it's, and you're right, but from a facilitator's perspective, they're like, I'm not touching him, so it's independent.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I see. Is
Yeah.
that still what the people who use letterboards and move the letterboards would think? Is that because they're not touching the person, it's still independent? Is
Yes.
that the
Yeah.
logic behind that? Okay.
Yes.
That's why they see it as different. Okay.
Yes.
That's so strange. It's just to me, it sounds like you just flipped the coin. It's like you just heads or tails. It's like you move the hand or you move the board. It's like it's still somebody moving it, you
But
know?
it's more convincing. The other thing that happens with the difference between an observer that's looking at touch-based FC versus no touch FC. So with touch-based FC, you're watching the person hold on to their wrist and move the letterboard. So it's in some, I mean, it can be really subtle, but that's, you know, for the most part. If you see somebody grabbing somebody's elbow or grabbing somebody's wrist or even their shirt sleeve, then you're more likely to say, I think that facilitator might be doing more than she thinks she's doing. But if you're holding a letterboard in the air, the observer tends to watch the person being facilitated, and
Ah.
they miss the cues that the facilitators are, so they don't look at the board moving.
They're looking at the finger, basically.
They
Yeah.
look at the autistic person's finger moving, hand moving, like he's touching the keyboard. He's moving his hand and touching the letterboard. But what they don't see is that the facilitator is using hand signals like move your finger up
Right.
to the top of the letterboard or, over. They're not listening to the verbal cues or the physical cues that the facilitator is giving off. So the facilitator can actually be making huge gestures, but the observer is looking at the person being facilitated.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like a sleight of hand kind of
It
thing.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Huh.
It actually some of this actually does come from the magic world. The magicians actually use there's something called the ideomotor response where it's small muscle movements. Not all facilitator cueing is small muscle movements, but
Right.
moving the letterboard in the air is. And at a lot of the touch-based FC has to do with small muscle movements. And magicians use that all the time in their tricks. That's how they fool people. Is these small, so if you look into the psychic world and the magic world, that's why James Randi in I think it was 1992, he was a magician and skeptic. He was called into the University of Wisconsin to test children for psychic ability they were being facilitated, and he saw right through it like in 6 seconds. He as soon as he saw it, he's like, the 6-year-old is spelling out huge medical terms. There's no way that he would know how to spell that. And like he had there were two facilitators. He had him leave the room. The kid had lunch. He had a sandwich, and then he came back. He had the facilitators come back in and type out with the child what he had for lunch. And the first person said peanut butter sandwich, and the next one said salami sandwich. Like they had two different answers based on the two different facilitators. So, like he saw it right away, and he wasn't trained in speech language development or autism or anything. He just knew as a magician and a skeptic, there's something more to this than just magic.
And as a magician, he has this nuanced training around like recognizing really subtle
Body movements.
right? Like, yeah, they're trained to notice those really subtle things, I'm sure, because that's probably such a key part of what they do in their work.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that is really fascinating.
There's
Wow.
there's there's a his name is Joseph Jastrow. He was a psychologist I think he wrote in, I can't remember if it's 1835 or 1935, but anyway, 100 years ago. And there's little bits and pieces that could be equated to facilitated communication way back then
Oh,
based
wow.
on body movements.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. If Rosemary Crossley and Douglas Bicklin had actually done their due diligence and done any research at all into the ideomotor response, which is also equated with the Ouija board and moving a planchette, then FC wouldn't be what it is today. It just, they just didn't. And when the skeptics were like, that looks an awful lot like moving a planchette on a Ouija board, they were like, oh well, no, it's not that, and they just moved on. They didn't take the reliably controlled testing seriously.
Which is interesting because ideomotor is completely subconscious. It's like noise in our nervous system. It's just how our nervous system kind of works in a way. Some of it is. And
yeah, it's like driving a car,
So it's interesting. You can't really say that you're not doing it because everybody does it. And in fact, like I think for neurology, sometimes when people get like essential tremors, for example, I remember there was a PhD student when I was going to my master's who did stuff on vocal tremor.
Oh, interesting.
And that was part of her presentation, was how people with like essential tremor in their hand, if you have them, if you have somebody, you give them a pen and you tell them to like draw a swirl, there's going to be some little waviness in the pattern, in the line, because that's part of our nervous system. You can't, most people, unless you're like, I guess, a trained artist, most people aren't going to draw a perfectly clean line.
Even trained artists, they know how to cover it up.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. You are a trained artist. There you go. Yeah, because I have seen that where it's like, use your, prop your elbow out to make it like straight or curved or whatever. And it's like, yeah, so this is more like in the air, just drawing it. And then if people start developing like a tremor, you'll start to see the tremor in that, because it's basically the waviness and the little bumps get bigger.
Sure.
Because that's a similar sort of thing. And it's interesting too, because like our brains and our nervous system is just naturally kind of noisy. And I think human to human, our brains just kind of know to filter out that noise. Like we don't, which is why the musicians can use it, because our brains are not trained to see it. Our brains are just like, that's just natural little bumps from just interacting with a human.
Well, I had kind of, that reminds me of when I was going through the testing. So in my case, there were false allegations of abuse that came out. And so we were thinking that maybe something was happening at home. And so they, after some hemming and hawing, we got to a point where we're like, what do we do? Do we move forward? We don't really know what FC is, right? It's still fairly new. But if this was a typically speaking person, would we move forward with contacting the Department of Human Services with these types of allegations that are coming out? And they were coming out with at least two different facilitators, me and another person. We were talking to each other. We were planting seeds into each other, but that's,
You don't know you're doing that. You're just kind of...
I know that now. I didn't know that then. So we moved forward with the testing. So what happened in my case was the Department of Human Services was called. My student and I did the DHS interview where they're asking you all these pretty pointed questions. They're thinking this is sexual abuse, so they're asking like who, what, where, when, and of course those answers are coming whether they're fabricated or not, right? They were FC generated, and I was the facilitator, so they came. Took me a long time to be able to say this, but they came from me. But in my imagination. And so based on the allegations that came out in the DHS interview, the children were removed from their home, and then fortunately, and I say fortunately because this doesn't always happen, the guardian ad litem that was hired to look after the best interests of the children kind of thought about facilitated communication and said, wow, we're in a really tricky situation here. Because if we're making these allegations based on a bogus idea, and he says this, he's Phil Warden on the Prisoners of Silence PBS or Frontline show Prisoners of Silence that came out in 1993. He was interviewed. So he was like, if these allegations are based on a bogus idea, then that's horrible. But if the allegations are real and we're just using a new technique and, unproven technique, but the allegations are real, then that's terrible too. So we need to figure out a simple way to figure out the truth in this situation. So he called Howard Shane from Boston Children's Hospital, who to me, it was probably the best thing and the worst thing that's happened. But Howard Shane is somebody who, right from the very beginning, advocated for independent communication in the clients that he was working with, and his team developed some of the first computer-based communication systems in the country. And he worked with people like Stephen Hawking.
That's who I thought of immediately. I'm like, Stephen Hawking, probably. Yep.
Right.
Wow.
Right. He was when computers used to be really huge. They anchored one to this guy's. He had cerebral palsy. They anchored this computer to his wheelchair and figured out how this person could communicate independently without a facilitator. Like blowing into a straw, or he said if you can twitch a muscle or blow into a straw, then and you have the ability, the cognitive ability to understand and use language, then you can communicate independently. You don't need a facilitator. Anyway, he did the testing and he came up with this really simple format for testing. So one of them, I think we went through like 3 or 4 different kinds of tests, but it was all designed so that I, as a facilitator, didn't know the answers. So it was all based on my student. I sometimes point to my right because that's where my student used to sit.
Right, yeah.
Right? So my student, it was all based on information that my student should have known, could have and should have known.
Like based off of previous
things from her curriculum, questions about her family life that I wouldn't know.
Got it. Okay.
Those kinds of things. So it's not an IQ test. It wasn't meant to trick her. She even had a secret signal that I didn't know about so that she could stop the testing anytime she wanted to. So she had the choice of to participate or not in the testing. And that was all set up ahead of time. And then I came into the room. So Howard did this test. One of them is I think it's fairly well known, where we were both shown a picture, and sometimes they were the same and sometimes they were different, and we were asked to type out what we saw in the picture. So all of the answers that were the same when we had the same pictures, of course, were spelled correctly, right? Because we had the same picture. But all of the pictures that were different, so she saw something, she might have seen a cat and I saw a shoe, right? So
yeah,
all of the pictures that were different were the facilitated answers were based on what I saw. So I saw a shoe, I saw a hamburger, I saw a tree. Hers were different. They were all based on my answers. And so during that testing, and this goes back to what happens in like a facilitator's brain, there were sort of I had these kind of breakthrough moments where, like in a controlled situation like that, I was like super, like hyper conscious of my own thoughts, my own breathing, like, so I had what I call breakthrough moments where I could feel myself saying, I wonder if she has the same or different picture than I do.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I developed during that time, that testing, it's sort of like I developed some sort of sense that, okay, something's going on that's, this is coming from me. These are thoughts coming directly from me. They're not coming from my student.
Interesting.
And I think that probably happens to facilitators all the time, but if you're in a uncontrolled situation, so especially when you're beginning to learn facilitated communication, you're a little self-conscious. You're like, oh, I moved the kid's hand that time, I won't do it next time. Like you have these thoughts in your head, but eventually you start, those kinds of things fade away, those thoughts fade away, and it begins to feel, it's more about a feeling than it is about an actual sense of accomplishment. And it feels like it's working, right? She's not resisting holding my hand and pointing to a letterboard anymore. The letters are you're taught to start with like fill in the blank, or if maybe you've got 4 pictures and you pick one, point to the cat. Well, the problem with that also is that the facilitator always knows the answers all the time.
Right.
So if they point to a cat, it's because the facilitator knows the answer and knows what a cat looks like and knows how to spell cat.
Yeah.
So it's all based on the facilitator, but that's not how the training is set up. You don't like I'm talking about like 30 years later, Janice, who understands how facilitation works and not, 30 years younger.
At the time, yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm just going by the guidelines, they're like, show her 4 pictures and have her point to one.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
like, yeah, she holds my hand and points to the letter C or the cat or whatever, and it's like, "Oh, she knew cat. Wow, that's great." And then you start convincing yourself over t it's like turning up the bath water, by degree, like, you
Yeah,
convince
yeah.
yourself.
You just get used to it.
Even it like, I have some friends that sort of, debunk they don't sort of, they do debunk, psychic readings and things like that, and it's sorta like you remember the hits and forget the misses, so you remember all those times when it feels like she had the correct answer
Right.
and that FC's working, and you forget all the other stuff with, like, the unintelligible answers, the time she's hitting you in the head, like, you don't you don't think of all those things, you just focus on FC works, you just have to keep practicing. That's the other thing in, the workshops, they tell you, you just if it doesn't work at first, you just have to be patient, you just keep giving it time, and eventually it will work. Well, eventually it does work because you're training the speech clinician who worked with my student after um well, reasonably that the family asked me not to work with their child. Reasonably. I'm not blaming them in any way, shape, or form.
That makes sense, yeah.
So anyway, after the testing, I wasn't to work with the student, and the speech clinician that came in after me said, every time I get out certain equipment, she just grabs my hand and automatically starts to point. So that's when I started thinking, and it's true in the literature, now we know that really a lot of FC is about behavior modification and teaching people to point on cue. Doesn't have anything to do with spelling. It doesn't have anything to do with comprehension. It doesn't have anything to do with communication. It
Right.
has to do with pointing to the letterboard. It's all I think it's sometimes I think of it as a coping strategy for the facilitator and not the it doesn't really have anything to do, useful to do with the person being facilitated.
Like, coping as in can you go more into that?
Well, some of the things that happen is that the student may become more passive. They actually abdicate responsibility for communicating. So the behaviors some of the facilitators report that their behaviors are reduced just because they're passive. They're just letting this activity happen. The other thing for the facilitators is that many of them have been told that their child, maybe they've gone through traditional speech language therapies and stuff that don't
Seem to have the impact, yeah.
reach the same standard or level sophistication of communication with their child that FC does. So the parents can have these conversations, all of a sudden maybe they're talking to somebody that's going to go to college or are really philosophical about life and teaching the parents what it's like to be autistic and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. But I think it's all in the facilitator's head.
It's like the parent kind of, almost like a self-therapizing kind of thing in a way, like they're maybe
Well, there's in the movie, yeah, I think it is. In the movie, the reason I'm pretty sure it's that movie. There's a scene where these people are from Sierra Leone, and there's a lot of like superstitions around autistic people, especially some of the behaviors that autistic people can exhibit were seen as like almost like being um, a product of the devil kind of thing.
Right. Like
So
a
in that situation, if you can say, well, I know my son or daughter's behaviors can be kind of strange at times, but he's writing poetry. We're talking philosophy, and we're
or they're quoting like a holy scripture that makes it not evil.
yeah, exactly. There's also a religious component to some parts of FC. Um, and so it makes that person more relatable. If you can communicate with words in particular, then that seems to calm people a little bit. Like, okay, I'll give those behaviors a little bit more grace because this person now is like I can see that this person is communicating with words in a way that I understand it.
That is absolutely fascinating to me because that's like one of my big soapboxes is dehumanization and how prevalent it is, especially with disabled people and autistics, obviously, non-speakers, the kind of stigma and bias that we still contain in our heads. We're just raised in society like that way. It's so fascinating because essentially it sounds like you're talking about people who are humanizing them all of a sudden. Like they weren't really people to them, but now that they're writing poetry and they're able to do all these things, oh, this is actually a human now. So I don't have to be scared that they're evil and I don't have to sit here and, try to protect myself or whatever. Now I can actually see them as a human. Therefore, if they're lashing out, maybe there's actually a human reason for it,
Mhm.
not just like an evil reason, for
Mhm.
example. And it is so fascinating because I think at the core of a lot of these things is that there's the dehumanizing piece, there's the societal piece, and even in the US here, thinking of like you suddenly have a kid who might go to college, it's like that sounds a lot more positive than the idea that your kid might need lifelong caregivers for dailies of activity living. We
Mhm.
don't have a lot of good social supports once they exit out the school district. They might have to end up in an assisted living facility somewhere. What
Mhm.
happens to the parents? How do we afford this? Like, we don't have very good answers to any of that.
No, we don't.
And most of the answers are horribly like, it just sounds like a nightmare, right? And it's never would be what a parent would want for their kid.
No.
And, of course, the real answer for that in my mind is we need to change the system
That's what I think.
and we need to change how much we support people
Yeah.
and supporting the parents with their own mental health and the burden of being a caregiver and like a medical caregiver, not just a parent. And like giving them time off so they can actually just be a parent, like that's really important. That is something that parents almost never get when they have a kid with high support needs. But that's a very complicated answer. That's the you have to advocate and change laws and convince people to fund it and keep the funding going and put regulations in place and monitor the ethics, and it
Yeah.
becomes this huge complex thing that is not an easy answer. It's not a comforting answer at all, and
No.
it's not even something you can guarantee someone will see within their lifetime. So I can understand why it would be so appealing to think, well, this my kid now could go to like Harvard and be like the next Stephen Hawking or something. They
Yeah.
could go to Oxford, possibly, instead of the other potential, which is like this much more devastating potential future of being stuck in a system that does not value them at all. And so I can understand that emotional drive toward that. But at the same time, you're still actually dehumanizing them in the it's still that moral model of disability. Because moral model has they might be evil or something, but there's also the inspiration porn side of the moral model of disability, which is like they're here to help us understand ourselves and they're here with this wisdom and they're these higher beings and that kind of a thing, right? And it's like across the disability community, people in wheelchairs who are just going to their job, they don't want someone on the subway to be like, "Oh my god, you're so inspirational for just, like, existing in your wheelchair on the subway."
They just want to be a person.
They're like, "I'm just going to work. What?" Like, "I go to work differently than you." Like, "Okay, sure." And so that's still sort of the danger side is that
Mhm.
I can see I can see someone feeling like this is a great answer to ethically what happens to my kid as they get older. And then also the ethically, well, I don't want to see them as less than human, so I'll see them as superhuman. But that's still not human,
No,
you know?
that's happening with the telepathy tapes too, which is, and I think the so-called no-touch forms of FC, like spelling to communicate and rapid prompting method, are, there's a whole, like a lot of the stories we're hearing, of false allegations of abuse cases, but also the telepathy cases are coming out of spelling to communicate and rapid prompting method in particular, not so much out of I mean, the touch-based FC is still happening, but for some reason, I mean, you talked about the telepathy tapes on one of your YouTube channel.
Yeah, the episode, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and a lot of that is superhuman stuff, they can tap into they're so evolved, they actually don't need the spelling board at all, they can just communicate through telepathy,
Right.
and
But the issue is the facilitator's not telepathic, I guess, so they do need the board still to,
right,
I
it's the
guess. Yeah.
facilitators, yeah.
Right, right.
But there's also now, I mean, sometimes I just have to shake my head. They're saying now that, the testing that I did with my student, because I think they picked mine, I think in particular because it was on, prisoners of silence, perhaps. So they're saying that the testing that I went through with my student, she was telepathically reading my mind and typing my answers to the testing. So the testing really didn't fail. We're just misunderstanding that she was actually telepathically reading my mind and typing out my answers, my responses.
That's a very interestingly circular interpretation there, I will say.
Well, it's another way of getting out of doing the authorship testing because they don't wanna do it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not it's Occam's razor, right? Like, they don't wanna accept the simplest explanation is probably the correct one.
Right.
And then also
Right.
you're inventing a situation where you can't test because they'll know the answers anyway. So now you can't, like, what's the point?
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's like not disprovable, not provable. It's just, you're kinda taking out that
Right,
realm.
so the testing that happened, in the early 1990s, the facilitators are actually much more willing to do the testing. Even though the guidelines have always said, "Don't test," there were hundreds of facilitators that were willing to go through testing because they were ethical and they wanted to know what was going on. "Let's see what we've got here." And most of the testing was not because of false allegations of abuse. When those started happening, there were like I read a number in a study. I think it was like maybe 6 dozen false allegations of abuse between 1990 when it was introduced to the United States in 1995. So there were a significant. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot.
One is a lot.
Right, absolutely.
So it sort of sped up the testing, but it's not the only reason why the testing was done.
Okay.
And the facilitate and telepathy was not talked about in any of those testing.
Not the thought, right.
It
Mhm.
wasn't even, you know, a thing. It's a thing now, but it wasn't then.
I know, it's interesting because I know I mentioned on, I think, the episode I did on that, I think I could understand why people might think what they're seeing, but it still is rooted in my mind in that there's still kind of a hidden stigma there. There's sort of an implicit bias there, an implicit maybe dehumanization or something there in the sense of I don't think they believe that the non-speakers they're working with have the capability to recognize patterns, like little hand signals, like you were saying,
Yeah.
or, the little subtle body differences, little subtle cues, essentially the little cues and prompts. And it's like, well, if you don't think they're cognitively capable of seeing those things, then it doesn't make sense that you think you're seeing this like higher being who's so incredibly intelligent, but then not able to notice like when mom mentions the Halloween candy or the Christmas Christmas presents, she glances toward this one closet.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah. I
like
mean, I would be able to find a Snickers bar if you had it hidden in your house.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I knew where my parents hid the Christmas presents. Like,
Yeah.
you figure it out,
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And it's one of those, like, once again, if it's something that a regular kid can do, there's no reason to think they can't if non-speakers can't do the same thing if you're actually seeing them as humans, as like fully functional humans and just regular humans who happen to have a disability. Then you're looking at like, well, if a speaking 4-year-old can do it, a non-speaking 4-year-old can do it potentially, right? And yes, some of them might have motor conditions and things like that too, but it's just one of those things where I'm like, pattern recognition is definitely a thing. Like, my neurodivergent brain's really good at pattern recognition. Like, I can definitely pick up on stuff, like, give me the right environment. And it's also interesting when you talked about briefly revisiting the idea that facilitators use it kind of as a coping thing and stuff is, this is one thing I read. I think it was somebody talking about like ABA stuff, which I know is a whole nother can of worms, but they were talking about how like behavioral conditioning is something that a clinician can do to themselves as well. Like, we often forget that we are equally susceptible to training ourselves to see things, interpret things certain ways, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And so it kind of makes sense when you think of like they became really passive. It's like, you can definitely convince yourself that's a good thing.
Yep.
Or you could stay a little critical and think, wait, let me make sure this isn't like they're dissociating and they don't actually want to be here. And, right? Like, there's two extreme possibilities. One could be a positive, one could be a negative. And the whole point of being evidence-based, even if you're not going by like a research study per se, but just staying more critical clinically, is thinking, let me double check and make sure this isn't like this kid is just miserable and just waiting to get out of here, and they're actually interacting with me and want to be there, right?
Yeah. But facilitators are always, like, locked onto the letterboard with their eyesight, so, like, they miss a lot of stuff that's going on with there's no
They miss the cues. Yeah.
you don't notice it, as a like, you're told to.
Mhm.
The guidelines say, like, make sure they've got eyes on the board and all that, but that's not what happens in real life.
That makes sense.
You're asking and answering the questions. You're multitasking, basically.
And you're trying to get data. You're trying to see if probably, I'm assuming, right?
You get into this flow state, of it's sort of stream of consciousness typing. So whatever, if I said, what did you have for lunch? And like something pops into, or at least in my head, something pops into my head,
Yeah, you can hear the voice answering you.
Cookies.
Yeah.
Sandwich.
That is another thing, 'cause I know before we recorded, we talked about that a little bit, how, not everybody has the, like, narrator inside their head. Not everybody has that personal monologue, that internal monologue that I do. I have it very strongly, and I know you said you do.
Mhm.
And I was actually just thinking that also could lend itself to thinking you're receiving messages from someone telepathically,
Mhm.
perhaps. If it's like you're not totally aware that that internal narrator might actually just be another part of your brain that's chirping in, that's
Mhm.
like popping in and saying, "Hey, actually, say the sandwich was peanut butter." Yeah, that's probably a good guess.
And it happens
Right?
it happens really
Yeah.
quick. I
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
I don't through the testing, that's those breakthrough moments I was kinda thinking. What you're talking about right now, it's sort of like that consciousness of, "Oh, are those pictures the same or are we typing out the same or different thing?" But I think that also happens with, what did you have for lunch? Or, like something pops into your head really quickly. You're typing it, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, "Oh, wow, that person, like she knew."
They, like, gave me the answer somehow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's probably where that feeling comes from.
That's really interesting, because I know, like, okay, this is a little personal side note. I've just joined like a meetup group in my town that's a board game night for just adults. It's at a little brewery. We get together, we do board games, which is really fun. But there's a lot of games I don't know, so I'm just learning. But it's one of those moments, it's sort of thinking of the internal narrator in that sort of sense, where it's like, there are times where it's like I make a bad strategy call, and I've sort of made a running joke that I always start strong and then I lose because I like second guess something, and then I just make the wrong strategy and I totally lose the game, which is okay. I'm still learning. It's not about winning. It's about the fun.
Right, right.
But it is that moment, those moments. It's sort of, I guess people also probably get this on test. I used to get that on test all the time, where it's like, I'm pretty sure the answer is this. And then that little voice pops in. It's like, actually, it's probably this. You should probably answer that.
Especially multiple choice. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah. And then you second guess yourself and whatnot. But it's like, I could see if you're in that sort of situation and you're kind of conditioned to only interpret that one way, I could see that becoming more of the norm of like that little teeny intrusive thought that's actually just an internal voice you're hearing because you have an internal monologue.
Mhm.
I could see psychologically somebody starting to interpret it under the umbrella of maybe this actually is a different instinctual thing, or maybe it's a spiritual thing, or maybe it's a telepathic. I could see that,
Mhm.
because I think you were saying before we started recording, in our little pre-recording chat, how you think that people who are really successful with it likely have that kind of internal monologue, and maybe people who don't have it, maybe they don't find as much of a draw to
Yeah.
this. They might
Yeah.
not understand it quite as well.
I'd love to if you could get facilitators to talk about their process, which is not gonna happen, but, like,
Right.
maybe it will someday.
Right,
I'd be
right.
really interested because I'm really
Yeah.
curious. Like, it's sort of I've been dealing with FC in one way or another for 30 something years, and it's what keep that part of it. I'm really curious about the facilitator's experience.
What's the psychology around
Sure.
the, like, voices like, because they know they're not, like, hallucinations or anything, it's just an
No,
internal voice they're hearing in their head.
it's more like an author. Like, I
Right.
think facilitators idealize the person that they're working with. They make them into a typical speaking person in their head.
Right. They kind of invent a character kind of, right?
Yeah, so it's like an author that's writing dialogue in your head, but it's in your head and you're speaking. I think that's what happens, is that you're actually speaking to this idealized version of the person you're working with.
Interesting.
Much like an author would develop dialogue for their characters. If you listen to writers talking about their process, they'll often say, sometimes I get so attached to these characters, and then I figure out in my story that like one of them gets sick and dies, and I'm like devastated. Like, so you can generate within yourself, you can generate those feelings for the other person that aren't.
Oh, for
It
sure.
it doesn't have anything to do with the other person. It's all internal.
Yeah, I came into this field from music, and I know a lot of famous composers, especially opera composers and stuff, they would, like, "fall in love," quote, unquote, with, like, their soprano lead characters that they would, of course, then die of consumption or something because 'cause we're talking about
Right,
opera.
right.
And it's similar thing, right? It's like they get so invested in the character that they just sort of fall in love with them, and then they feel devastated that this character dies at the end, and it does sound weird, I think, if you're not the kind of brain that can kind of, enter into kind of a fantasy world like that.
Mhm.
Like, if you have that internal monologue that strongly and you have that much creativity and that much, like, kind of fluidity with how you imagine things, it's like you probably would be very hard, and it probably sounds like these people are crazy, and they're talking nonsense. I'm sure people hear authors talk about their process, and they're like, "I don't know, those authors are weird and crazy."
Well,
Yeah,
some of them
right?
are,
I mean,
like yeah.
yeah. I don't know if Stephen King is completely balanced with some of what he wrote, but okay. The other thing I just wanted to talk about a little bit, if you're comfortable doing it, I was mentioning when we first started recording how some of this to me, I went down a rabbit hole of like anti-cult, anti-high control type stuff
Mm,
back in the like last year or so. And so, in the little bit that I know of how high control groups kind of work, it almost sounds like, especially the newer ones with the whole like, because I think you were telling me they considered it unethical to test,
mhm,
unethical to do that sort of thing. So then that like sounds more like to me when high control groups want to control information. It's always like, we have the real information. Don't listen to people on the outside because they don't have the actual information. And, it sounds like there's a lot of I mean, we talked about how you've received obviously plenty of criticism over your years, and even for me with my tiny little babby YouTube channel, the little teeny video I did on telepathy tapes, that is the one where I don't know
woo.
how the commenters find me, but that is some of the harshest. Like the comments are really, really rough and harsh, and it just seems it gives that same energy as like if you go to a YouTube of someone who's deconstructing from some kind of high control cult or something, they also receive similar sounding criticisms. So I can't help but think like there is sort of this parallel to be made there. And I just kind of want to hear more about your thoughts on that.
So in the early days when I was a facilitator, there were like break off groups where the parents of or the facilitators would get together and support each other, support groups. And even in the workshop that I took, there was this us against them kind of thing developing, like people who were doing the research were looked at as people who were jealous somehow that the FC people had developed this new and revolutionary technique, and it was under their noses all the time, and like we're persecuted because we're getting um maybe exaggerating a little bit the tone at the time, but it was definitely an us against them. Like they don't want us to be doing this. That's why they're criticizing us. There's going to be bad news. The workshop that I took, the workshop leaders were like, there's going to be some bad press about facilitated communication coming out, and don't listen to it because, word just listen to us kind of thing. And I think that was prisoners of silence. Little did I know that my case was going to be featured
Right.
when I was sitting in the workshop, but
Get thrust into the national spotlight.
yeah,
Wow, how
hey,
fun.
woo,
Jeez.
yeah,
What a ride.
what a ride.
Yikes.
And it was there, but it wasn't that there's a militancy that's happened over the years. It's almost like these FC kind of it hit its peak around 92, 93, 94. Prisoners of Silence came out in 93. There was a lot of bad press about FC during that time, so it went underground. And even by the mid, like 2010, somewhere in there, 2007, I think, the no touch forms of FC were starting, like rapid prompting method came first. And so they started coming out but rebranded. And with the criticism, they didn't stop and step back and say, maybe we need to look at this technique. Maybe there's something wrong with the technique. There's a flaw in the technique that keeps drawing criticism, but that's not how they internalize it. They're saying, you know, the people who are criticizing the technique of FC are criticizing people with disabilities, and they don't want them to have their own voice. And so they personalized it, and then they got into these small groups and stopped looking at the evidence that was building. Um, and then they came out with these new techniques, and they're like, we're not doing FC anymore. We're doing and it works because we say it works, and so that I don't know enough about cults and how to label cults as
Right,
cults
right.
to say.
Apparently, there's not actually a good label anyway, so
Oh, okay.
apparently.
Well, but I think that there are, like, use the term like high control, like in controlling information. I definitely think that's true. Like if and I think maybe part of the reason why people don't like to do the testing is because they've seen what happens to people who do the testing. Like
Mm.
I'm used as an
Mhm.
example of a bad facilitator in the workshops. Like
Right.
and
Which is so odd because you were trained by, like, one of the main trainers, right?
right, right. The person who trained me took the first graduate course in facilitated communication in 1990 with Douglas Bicklin at Syracuse University.
That's so strange to me when a teacher is like, "My student was actually bad. I thought they were good, but they're actually bad. Don't listen to them." That's very interesting.
Well, they always throw the facilitator under the bus, they always do. But then I think, like, Rosemary Crosley and 8 of her trained facilitators had the first false allegations of abuse cases in Australia. So is she
Oh,
poorly
yeah.
trained?
Right,
You know,
right. The
um,
actual creator is yeah, or whatever, yeah, like the actual
Anna Stubblefield, I don't know if you know that
yeah.
story.
Yeah, 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 that's the Netflix special, right? That was the one that
Yes.
came out on that. Oh, man.
She was trained directly from Syracuse University, and her mother was one of the first generation facilitators. Was she poorly trained? You know, they always throw the facilitators under the bus, and I mean that's another cult-like or high control group
Yeah, it
behavior
is
is
a don't listen to the people who left, basically.
yeah, yeah, which baffles me. You know, like the facilitator. Somebody recently wanted me to write an essay about facilitators, and when I didn't end up doing it, but when I was thinking about it, like there's a difference between the facilitators from my generation and the facilitators from now, because there's a huge body of evidence against facilitated communication and showing that facilitators can and do control letter selection, whether they mean to or not.
And we also have so much technology at our fingertips of, like, you don't even need a finger to communicate.
You don't, you don't. Oh, yeah, but
You can be a praxic and communicate, you know? You can do all of
they're
that.
warping technology now too, like all the eye tracking, like the Jaswell studies coming out of University of Virginia. The facilitators are holding the letterboards while the person has an eye tracking thing on their head. You know, like
Which I think is what's so crazy, because it's like you could totally just prop that up if you're using eye tracking. Like, you don't need someone to hold it. That's the whole issue right there, is that we can mount things. We have
yeah,
so many switches. We have so many ways to access things that it's I guess there would have to be a little bit of a difference in the sense of, like, you'd have to be able to ignore the fact that, like, you can put a speech generating device on an iPad and mount it somewhere and have easy access,
yeah.
and, it's just interesting. So what do you feel like are the bigger differences between, like, your generation and the current
Well,
one?
first of all, is information.
Mhm.
Like I think it's true that in FC, I had a professor friend who sent one of his students into one of the Syracuse University FC workshops a couple years ago.
Oh.
And they're similar. The training's actually very similar to the one that I went through. They talk a lot more about presuming confidence. Like it's almost like the guilt trip happens like with more intensity than back when I was a facilitator.
Oh, really? Like
Uh,
like guilting people into
yeah, if you don't presume competence, then you don't believe and you don't believe in facilitated communication, you don't believe in people with disabilities. That kind of
Right, I
that's
have seen that online
yeah,
actually, which is interesting to me because it's like that co-opting of a term that presuming competence is affirming, but it sounds like they're using it in a different way. They're
they're
not
using
really
it so that you don't have to test facilitated
right,
communication. Right.
which is not really what presuming competence
No,
means.
not to
Because
me.
in my mind, presuming competence, kind of back to what we were saying in the very beginning about how, in my mind, presuming competence is maybe they requested something and I got it wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm this.
Yeah,
All right. Like, that's still a big piece, is like helping with, like, they are free to correct me. If I misunderstood,
yeah.
correct me, please. I want to get it right. I want to know what's actually going on in your head. That's what I'm doing when I'm presuming competence. But that's not
Yeah, if I'm not a speech clinician anymore or a pathologist anymore, but if I was, I wouldn't, and I was going into a new situation, I wouldn't presume anything. I would wanna know what the person I would give people I believe that all people have the ability to learn something, like at least something, right? So that's I'm going in with that, but I would also wanna know what their strengths and weaknesses are so that I could target
exactly.
a training.
Yeah, you're
Um,
still a teacher of some kind, right? You're still a yeah, like, you're still there to help them learn something. That's
right,
your whole role as a clinician is
right, but that's not what happens with like, presuming competence with FC means don't test, don't do the authorship testing.
interesting. Because I think that's the other thing, my understanding, I might be wrong about this, so AAC specialist, let me know. I have an email in the show notes, you can always let me know this. But I believe one of the origins of presuming competence, at least in the world of using AAC, was that people sort of did some gatekeeping, keeping kids away from high tech. They would be like, "Oh,
Oh,
we need to start them on switchers because they're too quote unquote low," like with the low functioning
I
thing or
see.
whatever. They would sort of presume a cognitive inability to use a complex device.
Mhm.
And in reality, I kind of think it might have been more, at least from this is a little bit of my own observation when I got out as a clinician, but I think it might have been more like the newer, like, iPad type technology was intimidating to the older clinicians, perhaps?
Quite possibly.
Especially with certain layouts, if you're using, like, there are certain layouts where it's like, that is a tricky one to learn. You have to put in your
Or it's more
time.
expensive or whatever.
Yeah. Like,
Mm.
as a clinician, sometimes you have to put in some time to figure out, like, "Oh, that's how this is laid out. Okay, I think I get it now." But it would take a little time to figure that out. And, so that's presuming competence became like, don't assume that this non-speaker can't access high tech. Like, give them the best fit, give them the best device that gives them the most robust access to communication that they can grow into over time. That
Mhm.
was
I agree
the
with
idea of
that.
presuming competence.
Yeah, I
And
agree with that.
so it's not originally even the term around like exactly whether or not the communication was accurate or not. It's really just literally give them access to the most access to a robust, independent communication. That's what you want because you
Yeah,
want them to be able to grow as an adult
yeah.
and get maximum vocabulary and all of that. So it is interesting that they're using presumed competence, but they've really changed the definition of it for themselves, where it's like, you only use this method. It's not about just testing out different methods. It's about just not testing at all.
Right.
Use this method because this is the method that works, the end, kind of a
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually kind of the opposite of really what my understanding is using it in the AAC
Well, that's
world.
interesting. Yeah, that makes sense to me, though.
Huh,
Yeah,
pretty
interesting.
interesting.
They kinda co-op a lot of like, they co-op independent communication too, what they're doing is not independent
Right. It
communication.
never seems to be without another person
Yeah,
there.
and then they say, well, all communication is what's the term? Um
A cooperative or something, or I don't
yeah,
know.
just,
Yeah, collaborative maybe.
back and forth, you give there's a name for it, I'm not coming up with it, but, it just means, you know, like our conversation, we're sort of listening to
Right.
each other and feeding off each other and stuff, so that's what happened. They're saying that's what happens with FC2, but it isn't.
Well, not if you need the same person with you all the time. Yeah, that's what's so interesting. Because 'cause I'm like, communication is two-way, absolutely. It's,
Yeah.
you need to send a message and have someone receive the message, and messages go back and forth, of course. But the whole point of independent communication, once again, bringing it to the more human level of what all humans do, especially just any adult, you want to be able to go into like a new job. You can communicate with people there. You've never met them, but you can communicate with them,
Mhm.
right? And you can go to a new town, you can make new friends, you can communicate with new people. And that's what independence is being able to just walk into any kind of environment and still actually communicate something that you need to communicate, right? So, and then I always use the example with when I'm working with like non-speaking kids and I want the parents to understand like multimodality. I used to always use the example of like being plopped in a foreign country where you don't know the language. Communication is what you would need to indicate you need some help, right?
Right.
Communication is like, I can't speak the language, but I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I need a bed, I need a place to be, maybe a phone, right? Like
Right.
like that's what you do for communication. That's not language, but that's communicating. And then language allows for more specific, like kind of robust, philosophical ideals and all that sort of stuff and describing why you like ice cream, right? Like why it's your favorite flavor, right? Like it's that kind of stuff. And that's why I think of multimodality communication because technically we all are multimodality. We all use all of our stuff. But that is interesting to think of. That's what I thought was so red flag is like, you can't say it's independent if the same person has to be there all the time. Now you're very dependent on that one person. It's the same dependence as somebody with complex medical needs having to have a caregiver there for like going to the bathroom or
Mhm.
getting a shower, right? It's the same kind of reliance and dependency there. And I don't think when I worked in the medical field, physical therapies and occupational therapists would not consider you independent if you still need the same person there to help you get in the shower every single time.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's like you have to independently access a shower in a hotel room, in your own home, in someone else's home. That's independent.
Yeah.
That's not, so
Or
it's
or their ability to spell, like, I if the facilitator isn't what happens when the facilitator isn't within auditory or physical range of the letterboard? They don't they don't pick up the letterboard and start typing on their own. They're the facilitator controls access to the letterboard or the keyboard or whatever it is.
Interesting. So they don't have it all the time. They're not the ones who just carry it around on them.
They might, but they don't use it.
Yeah.
They only use it to spell when the facilitator is present. I've seen videos where even on the telepathy tapes, there are people that can use a iPad to find their favorite movie or game on the like YouTube or whatever, but all of a sudden they can't spell. They need support to point to letters. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, like they have the fine motor to access an iPad and navigate it and do everything they can. Yeah, that is a good point, especially with the arguments around. I know I've seen something about whole body apraxia being one of the arguments for needing a person or something, and it's like, but if they can do...
There's somebody, Larry Bissonette is his name. He's an artist. He's been facilitated since 1992. And the argument is that he needs somebody to hold on to his shirt sleeve. It's when he needs support and somebody to hold the letterboard for him, right? He's got a movie. They made a documentary about his art. He can paint. He can use a paintbrush by himself. He can use a saw.
Oh, wow.
He can use a hammer to nail in. He makes his own frames. He saws wood up and hammers it together and makes his own frames.
Sounds like he has better fine motor control than I do.
He can shave. Yeah, yeah, I know.
Like, I always get scared I'm gonna bang my thumb when I use a hammer.
Yeah, he made coffee. He can make his own breakfast. Whatever.
Wow.
So my question is, why can't he point to letters on a letterboard? The other thing that happens with him is he can type out things with his facilitator there, but he can't read. He's got some verbal skills and some basic literacy skills. He can't read all of the words that he types out. It doesn't make sense that he's spelling all these words and he doesn't know what he's spelled.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
And then they also have in other videos they have the person is saying one thing and the facilitator is typing out and saying that he's saying something else. So at the same time, somebody's saying words and supposedly typing out something that's completely different. I don't know anybody that can do that.
That's very interesting. And I'm guessing it's like what you were saying where the typing supplants what was spoken. So
right,
you ignore the speaking and the typing is the actual message.
Correct.
That is interesting. I could keep talking with you forever about this, I think.
I know. We might have to do this again, another episode.
I know, this is so fascinating. I might honestly just end up splitting this up into a couple of episodes, just a part 1, part 2 or something.
Yeah,
I think it's all
see what you get for
just
feedback.
So fascinating.
Yeah,
exactly. But I did want to just make sure to talk about a little bit in terms of like asking you, especially since you had to go through the process of like, you did facilitate communication, you did the training, and then you kind of removed yourself and like started clicking in your brain that something's up.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're this fantastic advocate, which thank you so much for everything you do. It's
thank
so
you.
incredibly important.
Thanks.
And so I think very meaningful to hear from someone who's been through that. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of courage and a lot of, obviously I can only imagine how much mental health type work it would take.
It still gets me at times, like 30 years later, like when I really think about it. Yeah, it was really hard. What was really strange was that when like after the testing, by the time before I left the testing room, there were people on staff that knew that the testing had failed. I didn't know the testing had failed officially. I felt crappy about it, but nobody debriefed me. Nobody ever debriefed me from the school.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
They just said you can't work with a student anymore and the testing failed. That's it.
And that's it.
Nobody debriefed me.
Wow.
I talked with the special ed director a little bit, and we decided that to drop facilitated communication from the school district at that time, and I've just learned recently that spelling to communicate is being reintroduced into the main schools. So I'm like, that's a project I'm doing right now.
Oish.
So it was really hard, and it didn't like intellectually from the testing, like I said, I had those breakthrough moments, but that stuff doesn't stick like right away. There was like this window of time where I could have just as easily gone back to the university and taken more training.
You might have thought it was more you and
You know, maybe I was the bad facilitator because that was coming from everybody, critics of FC and proponents of FC were all looking at me saying, "You're the bad facilitator." Right? I'm getting it from every direction. It was confusing to me. I didn't mean to hurt people, but that's what I did with my actions, right? So
right.
I'm like the other thing is I had taken the facilitated communication workshop at the University of Maine. So like and I had this big faith in and I still do in a way, but in universities, right? Like
Right. It seems legitimate.
surely they would have vetted this. So like everything was under question. It was crushing. Like it was my response was I left teaching. I spent a lot of time not talking about it. But then in 2012, Howard Shane kept in touch with me, thank goodness. Answered my questions. Like I would call him up crying on the phone and he would just like drop what he was doing and talk to me for
Oh,
hours.
wow. That's really great.
Like over the years, like emails and like I have a lot and he's like one of the most demonized from the FC perspective, he's one of the most demonized. It's tearing me up. He's one of the most demonized people, and, like, he was so compassionate. Like, during the testing that was the other thing. Facilitators aren't supposed to test because the testing was gonna be really adversarial. He was respectful. He wasn't adversarial he was kind, he was gentle, he was respectful, so in my head, I'm like, "These things are" there was this competing, cognitive bias these competing things and the FC people did me a favor because they demonized me. They would not talk to me.
They just kicked you right out of the community. Yeah.
So I got pushed into the scientific part of it, the critical part of
Yeah.
it. Even John Palfreman, one of the few reporters I trust, um, sat and talked with me about it, asked me like really gentle questions like, "Huh, do you like he wasn't confrontational, but like, how is it that you believed that, and did you know that these other studies have been done and things like that? So I think I was caught in this thankfully caught in this window of time where I was open to hearing evidence that went against my belief system. And frankly, it made more sense than what I learned in the FC workshop. It didn't make sense to me what they were saying. Base and with the testing, I think combined with going through the testing.
Right, and having that doubt. Yeah.
That's why I'm such an advocate for testing. Like, almost every blog post, I get that in there, like, "Please do the testing. Reliably controlled test so you can feel for yourself what it's like to be in that situation."
Yeah, and then they say, "Nope, that's unethical, don't do it."
Right, right.
And then it's like, well, that's a protective, I guess, against but yeah, that is interesting. That is actually, at least from some of what I know of high control groups, that is something that also happens a lot where once somebody leaves the group, they become vilified and they get so chastised by the community. And that's often what keeps other people in the community is the fear of losing
Yes.
the
Yeah.
community you've developed.
Yes.
So you kind of became like in a way, the martyr that sort of probably helped to keep some people in a way
Yeah.
to like, at least to some folks. And that, yeah, I mean, they will vilify other people. And then, you might find that the people that they vilified are the ones who are actually like, I'm open to talking and like
Yeah, amazing.
meeting someone with compassion, right?
Yeah, Howard's not the only one. Like people, I wrote an article about my experience in 2012. Like, because there was another false allegations of abuse case that was similar to mine, and I'd been out of it, out of teaching and out of FC for quite a while, and there was a 2020. What was her name? Alice Gone. I even remember her. The reporter got my phone number or email or something the night that the 2020 was going to air that was talking about this, comparing the case I was involved with this new one that was in 2012, right? And she said to me, "I'm going to talk about this whether you say anything or not," like really aggressive. The day, like, it's airing tonight, and she emailed me like 2 hours before the thing for a comment.
Oh my God. I probably wouldn't have even gotten the email.
Well, yeah, well, like,
Jesus.
yeah.
Yeah. God.
And anyway, and I talked to her and I said, "FC, it doesn't work. It doesn't work." But then she went on and did her thing. And then so after that I was like, "All right, look, if people are gonna," by then I was clear in my head that FC didn't work. Like my emotions had caught up with my intellect, right? I'd seen Prisoners of Silence. I'd seen how other people had gone through the same kind of testing that I went through and had the same results. Like, it wasn't just me. Like, other people that were trained from Syracuse University, like, there was a part of me that was like, "Well, I trained at UMaine, maybe the Syracuse people were better trained than I," all those things. You're trying to, like,
Right.
figuring
The
out.
little,
The Syracuse trained facilitators went through the same testing I did and came up with the same exact results. And I'm like, "Okay, so this doesn't work." Like, that's when my intellect caught up with the emotion. It's like, "This doesn't work. It
yeah.
doesn't work.
It's not just you.
Not just me.
It's actually,
Like, these other people,
yeah.
it doesn't work." And then from then, I just went on this, like, "All right, if reporters are gonna call me," 'cause by then I was, like, pretty much the ODHEC people moved on and retired and whatever, they're not speaking out. I think I'm the only facilitator now that speaks out publicly against FC. There are others
Wow.
in the background doing their own thing, like, on a personal level, which is great. Like, I say anything helps. Like, tell
Yeah,
your story.
absolutely.
You don't have to tell it on
Yeah.
the world stage. Tell it to the people that you're involved with, to your school. I
Not
don't,
everybody wants the national attention or the world attention.
or
Yeah.
should, I was just like, "Ugh, if I don't even want to," but I decided that if my name is gonna be associated with facilitated communication, then I'm gonna speak out against it. And my name is, unfortunately, I get emails from people in different countries and stuff. I'm like, "Yeah, I've read your articles." I'm like, "Really?
Like, wow.
Really?" Like, wow.
You're the name they found. All
You
right.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's sort of like, I didn't ask for this, but since people are calling me, I'm going to do everything I can to learn about facilitated communication. And so that's so, like, over time that that it's still personal to me, but I've gone beyond, in most ways, I've gone beyond me. The reason why I spoke out at first was guilt, right?
Yes.
I
Right.
caused this problem and I need to try to fix it the best I can by saying I made a mistake. That's the first thing. Like, these facilitators that get sued and stuff, like, it's because you don't apologize. Like, I dodged, like, the family that I worked with also believed in FC. But as soon as I knew that it didn't work, I said to them, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry."
Like, you didn't know either.
And that's what they wanted to hear,
Yeah.
like,
It's that humility of just recognizing you're a flawed person who just, yeah,
yeah,
like that happens.
yeah.
Some people don't have malicious intent. It's just, I thought it worked. I thought it would be a good idea. And, or yeah.
And I mean, the pushback is harsh. I mean, the criticism from especially at first, not so much now. I think I've sort of earned my place in the critic world, like, but they had to test me
You
first.
got your stripes. Yeah.
But the criticism was really harsh at first, and I think that we need to change that as well. We need to say to these facilitators, uh, 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 hmm, let me qualify that a little bit. I feel a little bit differently about the academics who should know better, who are still promoting facilitated communication in any of its forms. They should be doing the testing. The rank and file, I'm talking now to the rank and file facilitators. it's not your fault to get involved in this. You know, it's compelling, and most people come from a place of compassion. And so us on the outside that are looking in need to make it so that facilitators can say, I made a mistake. You know, I'm willing to look at the testing. I'm willing to look at the evidence. You know, I made a mistake. I really wanted this to work. I really did. I really wanted to help my child, but it doesn't, you know, and I made a mistake. But that's not the feeling. You know, like I've been involved behind I'm much more comfortable behind the scenes than up front. Um, but slowly over the years, we've developed, not just me, but you know, I'm sort of somebody called me the queen bee today. You know, like I'm kind of
Nice.
like I know all these people because they've touched base with me, you know, like so I have people who are currently being falsely accused of abuse through spelling to communicate. They've emailed me and I've been able to connect them with people. So there's a network now. Before there were people speaking out, but there were ones and twos across the world, and now we're sort of trying to bring people together.
Build a bit more. It's like a new generation of people who need to come out and
Yeah, and from like psychologists, people who work directly with autism researchers, speech and language pathologists, um, parents that are against facilitated communication, facilitators, not very many of us, but there's some facilitators that have moved towards the scientific side of facilitated communication, all working together, all bringing different perspective. I've learned so much from people that have skills that I don't have. Like I have this experience that may be unique, that in the fact that I was a believer and now I'm not a believer. But other people need to fill in that story. Like there's a whole I feel like there's a whole story that needs to be told. It needs to be told by the people that have been victimized. It needs to be told by people who have ways to, who have access to augmentative and alternative communication, things that I've learned along the way that I didn't know. Like
Mhm.
all of it needs to be we all need to be working together.
Yeah, and that's what's so concerning from the ethical standpoint as a speech language pathologist is the idea that we do need, if there's any child who is now adult who has been through FC and maybe has actual independent access, if they could talk about their situation, but they need independent access in order to tell us about their experiences. And that's what becomes so difficult if you couch this so firmly in this one person is the one panacea that allows them to communicate, and therefore you can never talk to them without that person there.
Yeah.
That's giving that person a whole lot of power in the situation. Because once you take away communication from someone, they've lost pretty much all power to really
Yeah.
have any kind of autonomy in their life, you know? And I can see also, like, I guess for myself, speaking out to any new clinicians or any potential clinicians out there who are curious about it because they're using certain terms that sound good,
Mhm.
sounds
Yep.
great.
Sounds good.
Um, and I know it can feel when you're working with non-speaking students, especially in schools and such, it can feel like you can definitely hit these walls where you feel like they're not communicating, they're not using their device as much as I would like them to, they're not making progress the way I want, and I think it's really easy as a clinician to look at yourself and think, "I must be failing this client somehow." Like, I'm not
Mhm.
there's something I'm missing, and I'm not quite getting them the access I want them to have, and
Mhm.
I think I could see that making this type of technique, the FC type of whatever it may be, whichever one people are leaning toward, I could see that being, appealing. That there
Sure.
is potentially this one technique that will open up this child and they will talk with everybody and it'll be amazing. And it's just because I would like to think that the evidence would stand for itself, and I think for many clinicians it does. But I do think there are clinicians where it's like, well, especially neurodivergent-affirming thing is kind of new, and like maybe the old evidence was more based in bias, da 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 da.
Right.
Right? There's probably so many ways to question it with the evidence that I don't know. For myself, I just keep coming down to independent communication means you can do it with strangers. You don't have to know the people in the room. You can still communicate. You can walk into any restaurant, you've never been there before, you can order. You don't need somebody with you to be the one to order or to be sitting there touching your shirt so you can order or yeah, or whipping out the board. That like a communicator should be able to do that themselves just like any other person. So
Mhm.
I always think instead of maybe looking for that specific little strategy that might be the answer that actually makes progress for this one kid, I guess from the trauma-informed perspective, I think maybe we should just back up and go a little more meta and think more of that human. Are they motivated to communicate with people that are around them? Do those people actually believe their protest? If they ask for a break, do they get a break?
Mhm.
If they're in a classroom where people, as they would call them, physically redirect, if they like grab them and move them places and it's dysregulating, why would they want to try to communicate with those staff members? You know,
Right. Right.
if they say like, please don't do that, and the staff members do it anyway, it wouldn't be surprising to me that they just wouldn't want to. And so I do think there's a lot of room where people still need to work on understanding, like, what is the motivation for this kid to communicate? And like,
Mhm.
I usually would take it with kids who didn't want to use their device with me or didn't really want to communicate with me, like especially new students, especially in high school if they don't know me or whatever.
Right.
They're
You're not my
teenagers.
speech
I get it.
therapist. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I'm the new person. I
Yeah.
know. A lot of times I would just start with like trying to learn their likes and dislikes. I just want to know like, what's your favorite food? What do you like about pizza? I like really cheesy pizza. You like really cheesy pizza? Or you like the pepperoni? What do like, what's the part?
Right.
And I just want to connect with them more of that human level
Sure.
because I want to demonstrate that communication is not just about me telling you what to hit, what buttons to hit. It's not just me telling you what to say. It's like, I want to learn who you are as a person and what your needs are. And so I guess I don't know. My hope would be from this episode and everything that maybe people can just, instead of thinking down this path of like, oh, this looks like the answer, maybe just actually take a step back and be like, maybe I should just approach these kids as kids and like just as people. And maybe don't focus as much on a device if they're not using it. Maybe look for other communication, multimodality,
Mhm.
whatever else they're doing to show
Mhm.
you things. And maybe if you can show that you're a safe person in the sense that you're trying to take their perspective, you're curious about knowing them as a person, you're curious about meeting where they are and giving them what they need, maybe then they'll start to communicate more
Mhm.
instead of needing just the right board. Because I think it is tricky nowadays, I think, with evidence when it comes to research and science with the changing paradigms. It gets a little tricky because science is a little behind things that make autistics different versus disorder, right? Like deficit based versus holistic, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But when it comes to communication, I feel like we still have some pretty solid evidence against like a lot of human psychological complexity happening with FC, but that doesn't mean it's independent communication. It doesn't mean it's the answer.
Right. Right. I guess in my ideal world, I'd like the people to take the top 100, whatever the if touch base, spelling to communicate, rapid prompting method, spellers method, and do the authorship testing and just see what happened. That would put a lot of this to rest. The telepathy stuff too, I think, would be solved.
Yeah.
Not the testing that the telepathy tapes people are doing, but real reliably controlled testing. And it doesn't have to be like mine was done with pictures and folders,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have to be this big, complicated, scary, all of
No.
that. It's all of that's a myth.
But thank you so much. I admire you so much for all the work you're
Well,
doing,
thank you.
especially since it was thrust upon you
It
and
was thrust upon me.
you met the moment though.
I did. I
That's
did.
it's
Reluctantly
pretty impressive.
kicking and screaming all the way.
I don't know, sometimes those people make the best advocates 'cause, they really, I mean, you clearly are very passionate about it, which is, you know, very important and wonderful, and I still very much admire anyone who's ever been able to face that they're wrong and make changes. That's just an astounding amount of strength and courage.
Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate that I had a lot of people helping me along the way too, so I am very
Yeah.
grateful for that. Yeah.
So anybody who's questioning, they can probably email you. Probably
Yes.
contact you or
Through
check out your
facilitated
website.
yes. You can contact me through the contact form on facilitatedcommunication.org. That's our website.
Perfect.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. And there is a ton of great information because I ran into it when I was doing my little research and deep
Oh,
dive,
good.
and
Yeah.
great information on
We
there.
tried
So,
there's a lot of reading material on there for people that wanna if you want a deep dive.
yeah, 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 and the evidence that's out there and everything. So, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening till the end here. Thanks for sticking it out. Like I said in the beginning, if you want to hear more of our conversation, you can head over to my Patreon page and access that for free. I'm going to try to post it within a week. I'm not going to do quite as much editing, so I think I might even just put it up kind of as is to start out with and can refine it later and replace the file. But yeah, head on over there. I'll be sure to leave it open so that people can do more discussions. I believe you'll be able to do comments and discussions if I just make the entire thing publicly accessible. And if any of this brought up any upsetting emotions for you, please do take a time, take deep breaths. Go find something that brings you some joy or something that's, funny, lighthearted, something like that. Just give yourself a little emotional rest here. That's totally fine. And even in really trying times, it's also still very important for us to experience some level of happiness and joy because those are essential parts of our human experience. So head on out there and do what you can to take care of yourselves. And thank you so much for listening once again. And until next time, everybody, bye.